Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Here we're going to be talking about how you play Shai. I have covered a video like this in the past, although that one sadly was not my favorite of videos, mainly because I was new to making videos at the time and because there are things that have changed. Now before we start, I would like to say if you want, please subscribe, turn on notifications, like the video, leave a comment, show it to friends, do whatever you're gonna do. Check out my Twitch, join the Discord, anything you want. It really helps me to make more videos, and now, let's get into it. As a class in its entirety, Shai excels at supporting other classes. Now, this can be done in group grinds, like upper Gyphons, Olins is a big one, and other areas like that. But despite the fact that she excels at group combat, she can also help herself inside of solo combat in areas where monsters tend to not move too far or too often. In areas like Miramox, which used to be a good grind zone, which still is, especially after their buff to Atanis' elements being in the area, and with a seasonal character, which I do recommend you make one to test out a character if you want to, such as Shai in this case. Or areas like Underground Gyphons, where Shai and Wusa are two of the best classes in the entire game for down there. One of the things that makes Shai really usable inside of solo encounters, not just group encounters, is her 4 primary buffs that can be used with her Awakening weapon. Once you become level 56, just like any other character, you get your Awakening. Although there are only 3 actions that can be used to attack, none of them really excel in PvE situations, and in PvP, only Force Echo is used. Now, there are 4 buffs which really excel at helping everything in general. There's Sun, Moon, Stars, which allows for extra attack speed and movement speed. Time to Shine, which allows for extra Black Spirit Rage recovery or BSR recovery. Summer Rain, which applies debuff resistance, making it harder for enemies and mobs to debuff you. And Shout to the Sky, which gives you plenty of HP, increases the max amount of HP, and also gives you extra HP recovery over a specific period of time. These are the 4 primary buffs, so you want to cast once every minute, as that's how long it lasts. It has a 60-second duration with a 10-second cooldown. Then there's Misty Haze. Misty Haze is a big debuff for enemies with a 3-minute cooldown, and it pairs with Do It Better, which is a 3-minute cooldown buff. This only lasts 30 seconds, while this can last also only 30 seconds. And lastly, we have Delusive Light, which is another debuff that only lasts 20 seconds, but is a massive debuff for damage. These skills make Shai viable in solo combat and excessively good in group combat. Now, outside of Awakening, in the main hand weapons, what I would recommend skill-wise would be Twirl. You need to use this occasionally as it helps you to recover mana. Twirl 3. It's used very situationally in only specific grinds. 1, 2, 3, which is the primary damage skills, and some people like to use Go with it. I personally don't prefer it much. Quick 2, which allows you to get further behind the enemy. It also gives you a good distance for 1, 2, 3. Eat This, which is a ranged stun attack. Stick to Me, which gives you a super armor for about 1 second, plus extra DP, and it heals you a lot. It's pretty good for just staying alive in a sticky situation. And then Try This. There's also Hop 3 that you can use as well. Both of these give nice little buffs. Accuracy buff, and this one gives a nice debuff, which is all DP minus 35 on PvE. This debuff is shared with Twirl 3, which is only used situationally, and Quick 2, although it cannot stack. Now, outside of damage skills, we have Tuck and Roll. Tuck and Roll gives a massive attack speed boost. We have Yippee, which is mainly just a movement skill used from get to pack and long distance transportation. Cheer Up and Get Well, both used to heal heavy amounts. This one heals small amounts for a large extended period of time. This one healing a lot of health over only a short period of time. It also has a higher cooldown. And then there's Gather Round, which pulls enemy towards you. This one's also used situationally. Now finally, outside of all these skills, there are the 3 you should click here. Here, I'd say Sharing as Caring is probably the more preferred one, as it applies a DP buff towards magic for all allies in the radius, And for everyone standing in the area, it heals them. Twirl Boom and Tumble Wumble are used by many people. Either one really works, though both are heavily nerfed inside of PvP. It's kind of crazy how little damage Shai does in PvP. And then Careful is the one I would select for down here. It heals a massive amount of health in the area you throw the object at. Let's go over the skills again. Let me pull out my other UI for this. Okay, if you look at these 4 skills here, those are the primary awakening skills that you are going to want to use. So if you hold F and then spam ASD once you see the animation pop, then it uses every single one of the buffs, and you can go back to your main hand. Usually, since you only need to apply these buffs once every minute, the fastest way to get to your main hand would be your Flooring Leaves down here. These leaves charge up, and once they get to 30, you can get a 30 AP buff by jumping. Now that we've charged up, we can show you. You can also, if you really want, hotkey this ability here. Press it, and then hold F and spam ASD. That way you don't need to pull out your awakening weapon. But once you do that, you can just jump, pulls out the main weapon, and you get the buff. You typically want to initiate battles by starting off with buffing and then going on in. That way you have all your buffs and don't have to stand there taking damage trying to apply them, or possibly even being stunned out of them. And once you get into your main hand, that's when the main damage starts. You usually want to use Tuck and Roll, as that applies a massive buff, 20% attack speed buff for 10 seconds. Then there's also Hop, which is your main dodge skill. It is also sort of an iframe. It gives a nice movement speed buff, which is why I typically like to do all the awakening weapon stuff. Jump on into the main hand, then hop, roll, and start off with a twirl 3. Now that we've covered the buffs and all that, let's start with the main combat skill rotations. So first off, of course, you're going to start with the main buffs from the awakening. Hop once you get the full leaf charge. Then I usually roll and dodge, or dodge and roll. Either or. And then after that, I usually use Hop 3. Which, Hop 3 is a nice one to start with because it kind of attacks everything in your general area and applies a DP debuff to all of the enemies around you. That way, you can hit them all with a debuff, and it makes all the attacks from there on better. Once you do that, I typically like to get out of the situation by using Quick 2, which is this skill here. Also applies a debuff, but it doesn't stack with the Hop 3. Now, the movement speed debuff it applies does help, though. Same with the accuracy rate buff and evasion rate buff it applies. Once you do that, you can use Try This, which is basically just a giant area of effect attack. It's also good because it applies an accuracy buff. You can follow it up with Eat This, which isn't as used in PvE, but it can be a little good skill. There are specific skills you want to combine it with, like 1, 2, 3, which that's a BSR for 1, 2, 3. You can combine it with 1, 2, 3. For example, if you do Eat This, 1, 2, 3, it immediately goes into skill. But if you do Try This and then Eat This, it takes a while, or Eat This then Try This, it takes even longer. So typically, if you do want to use it, you would mash it up after doing Try This. Then you'd want to do Eat This, 1, 2, 3. Eat This, then Try This just doesn't work. You have to wait for the animation or hop and then do Try This, which also isn't the greatest. And then at the end of all the rotations, you just do 1, 2, 3, which is your main damage thing. Or if you don't want to do the entire thing, you could do 1 and then press Q or E to use the go attack. Which go, it just kind of goes to where the side of what you're looking at. If you used E for it, then it would go that way instead. I'm not the greatest fan of that attack, although it's good for bigger areas like Ullins. And afterwards, you just repeat the process. Here's what the skill combos would look like in tandem. So just be, you start off with all your buffs, roll, dodge, and just keep on going. Now, if you want, you can use this attack here, which is Twirl 3, right after you do Try This. It only works in very specific enemies. For example, I found it's much faster to kill enemies down in lower Gyphons using it, but if you're fighting something like Mirmox, it doesn't do as well. I cannot figure out which exact enemies it works best on, but for some reason, it works better on some than others, so I would just recommend testing it out in the areas you want to grind at, and then trying to figure out if you want to use it or not. Now, since these are the primary skills you're going to want to use, they're also the skills you're going to want to set for your skill add-ons. Now, for me, these are the skill add-ons I'm using. You can ignore the extra damage to humans. Eat This is primarily used in PvP as it is a long-range stun attack. So I kind of suck human damage on it because I love to do AOS in between my grinding rotations. So it's really annoying to try and have to switch your skill add-ons every time. In general, instead of extra damage to humans, you would want something else on there. For example, extra evasion rate or different things like that. But other than the human damage, these are some of the add-ons I recommend. In general, Shai is an easier class mainly because there's not too many skills. There's no real complex movements or mannerisms. All of the skills typically are easy to use and don't cross fingers much with each other, especially the combos themselves. And really, that's all there is before we actually start getting into the combat aspects. And because that's the case, let's get into those combat aspects. Now, because of how Shai attacks and how most of her attacks require her to stand still during the attack, or to get behind the enemy during the attack, a lot of the times, enemies don't move often, or are very slow are enemies that is preferred to fight against a Shai. Some of these areas include places like Mirmox Ruins, which is a pretty good area to grind on for seasonal stuff. It gives Atanis' element, so if you don't want to do potion grind, it's a pretty good area to go, since it also gives a decent amount of EXP for lower level players, or players who are just starting out with the game. They excel at Gyphon Temple Underground, as they do a hell of a lot of damage, while also being able to get a hell of a lot of back attacks. And of course, the group grind zones, Olin's Valley, Pataturos, or Gyphon Temple Upper. Each of these zones either require Shai to buff teammates and do damage of her own, or just a nice solo grind area where she can get a lot of damage in without having to move a ton, which is not ideal for her. If you are interested in some of these zones, I have a guide on Upper Gyphons and a guide on Mirmox if you want to watch them. And I do plan on releasing a guide for Lower Gyphons soon, and maybe a guide for Ullins. I need to get more into that area first. Now, that is all we really have. I don't think there's much else for me to cover. If there is, leave a comment and I will make a separate little thing for it. Mark my words, I will. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, turn on notifications, watch my other videos, show it to friends, join the Discord, check out my Twitch, blah blah blah, do anything you want. And I will see y'all later. Goodbye, everybody.